Welcome to Coaching in Session,
where limits end and growth begins.
Hosted by Michael Rearden.
This is your space to challenge the ordinary,
Unlock your potential,
and step boldly into your next chapter.
Your mindset journey continues.
Welcome, Art Harrison, to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Today, we're going to be talking about a plethora of mindsets, from where you were in your past to where you are today, and how you help people take the first step toward their dreams and their goals in their life. And it's such a promising idea for someone to have a goal or to have a dream or to have a vision for something grander than what they have right now. Sometimes things can seem almost out of reach because it seems so far away. Maybe the $1 million mark, where most people, they say, I want to make $1 million, right? But then there's something happening in that subconscious saying, well, you don't even have $100 in your bank account. So how are we going to get to that million? And there are just so many negativities that can go on in the mind. But sometimes that first step can be the hardest one to make. And you are a person that has not just taken one first step, but many. And so we're going to be learning about your work, learning about your past, and learning about your today. If you could, can you tell the world who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, as you introduced me, my name is Art Harrison. And I guess really my most defining quality or the defining thing in my life is that I've just always done the unconventional thing. I've always, as you said, that I've had doubts. I'm sure we'll get into that. You know, like anybody else, I'm afraid. I have fears. I didn't come from a place where I had more than $100 in my pocket, but I have always found a way to just go after things that just I questioned why I couldn't have them or why it wasn't possible. So most of my life, I've been an entrepreneur, starting from my early 20s when I built my first social network, actually pre-Facebook. I was one of those early pioneers. But it wasn't that I had a great strategy or that I had all the answers. I just started. And I continued that with other businesses. Most recently, I was a co-founder of a software company that grew to 100 employees. And the same thing, it was me and a friend that I'd known since childhood. And we just had an idea. And we said, what if we just try? And what I realized in all that was that's what a lot of people lack, is knowing how to take that first step, knowing what it's going to feel like when you are putting yourself out there, admitting to your friends or family that you want to do something. I think that in and of itself is a barrier for so many people, just saying it out loud. So I kind of am now focused on that, of just helping people start in motion, not necessarily knowing where they're going to go, but knowing that if they create a little bit of motion and momentum for themselves, they can go just about anywhere they want.
It's all powerful. One of the things that really caught my attention when you were speaking was the aspect of starting something and then planning for something. What is the difference, and what is it that you have experienced between the two, from just starting something, taking that first step, to planning before you even take the first step?
Again, I will preface this by saying that, you know, everybody is in a different place on the spectrum. And I am probably maybe skewed too far to the lack of planning side. So it's not that I recommend it for anybody, but I can tell you what I've seen, because I've seen a lot, right? In doing it, I've spent so many times in incubators with other entrepreneurs. I've hired so many people that had entrepreneurial dreams and aspirations. And from my perspective, while there is a healthy degree of planning, as I said, I don't recommend everybody just jumps off a building or a cliff without having any plan, which I have done metaphorically and a few times literally. But I do find that there's a lot of people that get obsessed in the plan. They feel that if the plan isn't perfect, that they can't begin, or they feel satisfied in advancing a plan. And they never actually get to the point where you start putting it in motion and realize that you were flawed from the beginning in your first assumption. And that's where I try to encourage people to start. And starting doesn't have to mean quitting your job. It doesn't have to mean going all in, but starting the momentum, seeing what actually works, seeing if you like being an entrepreneur, see if you like the career that you're thinking of changing into, because otherwise the planning can just be a cycle that never ends. And you can have a drawer full of plans that have never taken any step towards any of them.
Yeah, very true. I'm a type of person who likes multiple plans, like A, B, C, D. But then there's people who burn the ships, right?
Yeah.
There's no other alternative. And it's funny. I remember speaking to my grandmother before leaving Connecticut, because I used to live in Connecticut. Now I live in Texas. And I remember when I was leaving, I was telling her like what I was going to be doing. And then basically I also gave her some backup plans. And she was like, you were never a person. Like she knew me, for my whole life. I was 28 when I left. She was like, you were never a person just to just have one plan. You always had alternate plans. And so I knew what type of person I was. And so I could leverage that where I was like, I know what type of person I am. Let me plan for that type of person, because if I'm over here jumping off a building with, one parachute, I didn't plan enough, right? If you ever go skydiving, you don't have one parachute, you have two, right? So
Yes.
typically if plan A fails, you make plan B work, when you're skydiving. But in the mindset of starting, right, that plan A, that burn the ships mentality, I might not be the person. Maybe you are that person, that plan A, let's make it work, feet to the fire. I'm hungry for whatever I'm going for. There's people like that. And for me, it's hard for me to relay that type of mindset because I don't have it. If you do have that mindset, can you explain what type of things are going on in your mind when you're hungry for that plan A?
Yeah, I think before I do that, I think you just touched on an important thing, which is, one of the core principles of my life has always been recognizing who I am, recognizing, the strengths of myself, the people that are around me. It's the same way that I coached and mentored the people that worked with me. I had a business partner in my last company, and we both were really honest and open about who we were, what we needed, and there is no right way, right? But I think that being aware of yourself, and also, some of those tendencies are important. You want to have a plan B and a C, but other times knowing that if that is something you do to a fault, then recognizing where to push yourself, right? So for me, I am more of a plan A guy or of a it'll work out guy. And so I do have to catch myself sometimes and say, listen, are you blindly pursuing this because you've just always done it this way and it's always worked out? Or do you need to take a step back and make sure when you're going to pivot, where you're going to adjust? But I think that the way it kind of manifested in me, I've told this story many times. I'm going to quickly tell it to you now, which is it all started with not even a speech, but just something my dad said to me my entire life growing up. And he would just say, oh, you're a Harrison. It always works out for the Harrisons. And it's not like it did. I got a lot of family that are struggling, a lot of family that doing things differently, but it worked out in the way that we saw ourselves and saw life, right? So it was a story we told ourselves that wherever we ended up, it always worked out. We got out of the jam, we got out of whatever. And that led me to a type of confidence that I could just do anything and that it was going to work out. And what that looks like in practice is a little bit of self-delusion and confidence all wrapped together. So I always, with any problem, any solution, any idea I have, I believe that I'm going to solve it. I'm full of the confidence that it's going to work out. It rarely does, but I go into everyone like that and I can't turn that off in my brain. And the main reason is the feedback loop that comes from believing that it always works out. So it may fail. It may, I may be down. I may be questioning things, but I'll try again. And eventually something positive will happen. And the way my brain is now wired, I associate wherever I end up with all of those steps that got me there. So it works out, even if what that meant was I made 20 terrible decisions. I barely got out, of terrible situations, but I ended up somewhere good. Well, then I believe that only reason I got there is because I went through whatever I went through. And that just is this weird self-fulfilling prophecy then where I'm not afraid of risk or change. And I always believe that, it's the right thing to do because it's something. And I know that's a weird perspective, but it leads you to keep going. And I'll sum it up by just saying all the businesses I've created, all the weird things I've done in my life, I've never had an overnight success. They've all required pushing past mostly times where I probably should have quit or most people would have quit. And that's kind of where that plan A, plan B thing goes, is that if I would have had, for me, too many other plans, I would have given up on the one that I had because I didn't need it to work. I just moved to plan B, but I would stay with it. And then eventually something would come from it. Now, that doesn't mean that it's the only way. Someone with a better plan may have gotten to success in a fraction of the time and never had to deal with that. but that is just the way that I see the world. And it's never had to do with me being more talented, more educated, more planned. It just came, a little bit of luck, a little bit of chance, but more than anything else, just commitment, just staying with an idea long enough to truly understand whether or not there's value to it.
Yeah, true. Commitment is so powerful.
It
I
is.
remember my father, speaking of what fathers instill into their children, he, one of the things I've learned from him, or the sayings that I always will remember as long as I live, was he said to handle your business. And I was like, okay, that's powerful. There's no direction to just handle your business. Okay, cool. And no matter what, like if something is going wrong in my life, it's just handle your business. If things can be better, handle your business. So it's like that constant encouragement of you can do it, in the sense of handle your business, right? Like you are the person that's going to make it happen. And I think of myself, because I'm extremely stubborn, where as much as I have multiple plans, I don't abandon a plan, right? So like, for example, me starting coaching, it was going great when I started in 2018 and the pandemic happened. Lost like 60% of my clientele. I was like, ouch, like this sucks. And then it was me trying to figure out, well, what's the next step? And it was interesting because I knew nothing about audio or podcasting or anything like that. But that was where people were transitioning to, because they were locked up in their homes for 6 months. And they were like, well, what can I do? What can I watch? And so I was thinking in my mind, I was like, well, I had this idea of starting a podcast. And one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to get a partner. And there's so many clients that I have today, even, that they want someone to do it with, because they feel as if they're not alone. So they have a partner, a business partner, or whatever it be. And it feels as like, okay, we're going in this together. And it doesn't matter if they're a plan A-er or if they have multiple plans. It's just like, I have someone that we can rely on, or we can, hold us accountable for things that we might not want to do all the time. So one of the things I wanted to do when I started the podcast was get someone who will do the podcast with me. Like, hey, I wanted someone who can co-host with me and we can make it work, right? It'll be fun. And then I was thinking in my head, that would be a terrible idea. So, so I said, I'm going to do this by myself. And of course, the whole format of the podcast, it happened after I started the podcast. I had no idea how I wanted the podcast. Like I was going in live, like I was doing it live for the first 20 episodes.
Wow.
I go, this is not it. This is not it. So I changed it up and I said, okay, well, I'm speaking a lot. I'm doing all these workshops. I go, this is not it either. And then I started to get guests. I go, this is it. Yeah. Right. Because the whole idea of coaching in session is not so much for me to talk about mindset, so, for me to talk about problems, but for me to bring on other professionals, other business-minded entrepreneurs, doctors, athletes, whatever it be, and to impart some of the wisdoms of life to us. That is what coaching in session essentially is in a nutshell. And I knew I couldn't do it by myself. So I created the systems and everything to come into place for the guests to come on. And I know, and I'm going to say this, you and I have been on the schedule for quite a bit of time, right? And that is how every single guest is. Almost every single guest, because it's just the system of I would rather have someone, book out a month, 2 months in advance, because it does a couple of things, right? Number one, if you really wanted to be on my show, you'll come on.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, you have something to offer and you want to share it, like truly. Because there's people who get into coaching or they get into something and they're testing out the waters, right?
Yeah.
And before you know it, they're like, yeah, like this is not for me. And I'm like, thank you. Because I don't want to be presenting the audience with guests that are half in the water. Because how many people in life are half in?
Exactly.
So, to get this mindset of stepping fully into something or to even taking that first step is a huge endeavor. And we live in a world where people would rather not take any steps at all and just remain where they are. How can we start as a society or as a culture to get people to take more steps toward the things that they would like to accomplish in their life?
It's an interesting question. And sorry, you got my mind racing with a lot of different things there.
Yes.
The few things I just want to touch on, and then I'll try to answer that question as well. Firstly, I think that's fantastic, right? That is such a typical story of discovery. There are so few businesses, so few even career moves, anything that ultimately people are proud of takes, it takes time, and it's so rare to know it perfectly before you begin, right? That is the whole point of taking first steps, getting in motion. You can think you're going to have a podcast with a host, you're going to do something live. Maybe you thought it was going to be something totally different at the very beginning. Even you didn't know the podcast was even going to be part of coaching, but you have to be in it to start seeing what does, what doesn't work, matching it with your own personality that we already talked about, right? You may think that it's the right thing to do, and then it turns out your personality isn't suited for whatever the medium that you were planning on doing was, but there is something else that's good for it. So that is such a common thing. So many founders that I know, so many other people, their business wasn't the thing that they set out to do, but they discovered it once they had begun. And so it's just such a common story, and it's why that first step and just getting in motion is so important. So that's number one. The second one I was going to say was, like, you never know where it's going to lead you as well, which for me, I have a YouTube channel now where I've been making videos. I've been sharing it that way. And all that came from, I started with videos when I was a software developer in my career, then a sales engineer. I ended up as a VP of marketing in the times that I worked for other people. And in those early days, I didn't like the repetitiveness of doing demos when I was selling a software product. So I started making videos, and then I started making animated videos. And it was out of laziness or a frustration, but I developed a love for something and a comfort with my voice on film or in recording, and all that. Again, it never came from a plan; it came from action. In terms of how to encourage it, it's the the billion-dollar question, right? There's so many programs trying to encourage people around entrepreneurship, and I think entrepreneurship is one angle of it. But for me, it's really encouraging people to just get out of their comfort zone is where it all begins, right? It's the more that we normalize experimentation, and I lean a lot on the tech world because that is where I come from. The idea of iteration, some of the terms can be a little bit loaded. Some of them are a little bit too hustle culture for me, but, fail fast, iteate, break things, all that mentality, there is wisdom to it. Right? Like it's this idea that the faster you go, the more you try, the more you ultimately learn. And if you can learn and accept that in your life, there's so much that comes from it. And so that's why with FSTEP Initiative and the things that I've been doing, I am focused on the experience of an entrepreneur, not necessarily starting a business. So a lot of people will come to me, or they'll come to other coaches, maybe you as well. And, that is their goal. I want to make $1 million. I want to be successful. I want to have freedom. First of all, I personally tell them as a founder entrepreneur that there is money to be had at times, although some of my friends that have been in the banks for 25 years now with their pensions and their stock options are doing just fine. There's plenty of ways to make money in life, depending on what's right for you. And also, I work and have worked way more hours than most of my friends, so there's freedom. It's the freedom that I get. No one tells me to do it, but I do it more than anybody else. But anyway, where I focus is on the mindset and the experience. So I think you can learn to be entrepreneurial without having a business idea. You got to learn to promote yourself, for lack of a better word, because if you're an entrepreneur, you can't be silent, right? An entrepreneur is kind of inherently always having to promote themselves. Doesn't mean it has to be gross. Doesn't mean that it has to be salesy. But so if you can start there, and where I usually encourage people is like, just start adding value out into the world, talking about the things that you're passionate about, the things you're doing in your day job. Instead of being a consumer of content, start creating a little bit of it. I'm not telling people to go that they have to have a channel or be an influencer, but there is that first step of getting comfortable putting yourself in situations where you aren't going to get views, where you're not going to get, you think you're going to get 1,000 likes and you get 2, and they're your parents, or whatever it is. Those experiences build a muscle memory that starts compounding and allows people, when they do have an idea, when their plan A is actually polished enough to go after it, they are far more likely to take that step because they've done it. And so at the current time, I've been working on a program where it's all about that. It's what are the steps that an entrepreneur goes through? They have to put themselves out there. They have to be public. They have to learn to ask for help. I think that is one of the biggest things. And this applies to every career, every place I've ever been. People who raise their hand quickly and say, I have no idea what I'm doing. How do I do this better? Here's a rough draft. Here's the version 1 that I built in a day, not the one that I spent 6 months on only to find out that I've done it wrong or that nobody's interested in. So the more you can start leveraging those skills without jumping off the building, the more likely you are to just have those skills and apply them to your regular life, because they're valuable in a job, in a career, in a relationship. But you're also way ahead of the game if and when you take the leap into entrepreneurship. Because for so many people that I know, especially again coming from tech, brilliant minds, been to the right schools, they know how to code, they know how to solve some problem-ish, at least at the technical theoretical level. So they take the leap and then they realize that's a fraction of it. Like, you have to have something there, but at the end of the day, I now have to go out there and I have to convince people to try it. I have to win the support of my team and my investors. I need to do all these other things, and I have to lean on mentors and coaches and other people that have been there before me. Those are the steps that really are the second wall, right? The first wall is just starting, just getting over the fear to take that first step. And the second one is realizing that there are so many vulnerable moments, for lack of a better word, where you're exposed. That's the topic that I'm kind of obsessed with these days, is this: there's a real vulnerability that you don't see, because most people, they see the end product of entrepreneurship. They see the person in the news or on Instagram on their boat or their yacht or in their plane, or even just the local business owner, right? That is, got a park bench named after them or whatever it is. But what they don't pay attention to, and because people don't like talking about, is the year and a half of toiling, the awkwardness of trying to tell people about it and watching them roll their eyes. All those things they're part of it. And if you can get comfortable with that, see if you are comfortable with it, that's, to me, one of the telltale signs that you're built for this, or that you can learn the skills and that you're ready for it.
Yeah, very true. I was thinking, when I first started, like, the YouTube and everything, like doing things virtually during the pandemic, I had no plan as I did my first season of Motivation and Motion. So this is how I started everything.
Okay.
It was a motivational video series where I would put it on YouTube, and I had no goal, no whim. I was just making these episodes, putting them out there for whatever they are. Again, I didn't have the skill set at the time, but I developed it. And it was funny because I stopped around episode 26, 28. And it was so funny because I remember speaking to my wife saying, I'm going to do season 2. And she's like, I don't know why you stopped. And I was like, me either. So it was one of those things where I said, okay, I'm going to have a defined idea for what these seasons are going to be. Each season is going to be 24 episodes, and we're going to do it in the span of 3 months. We're going to be able to get one season through. And then now we have it for 1 year as one season, rather than just pushing out so much, because we have so many episodes that people can always go back to if they need motivation. I remember when I first started, like, the business in 2018, I would listen to motivational speeches every morning. So instead of having an alarm clock, of the annoying alarm clock, whether you have an iPhone or an Android device, there is the standard theme alarm that they have. But what I did was, you can actually change the alarm to be custom, and you can put it to like a Spotify or an iTunes playlist. So I created the playlist, and I called the playlist Wake Up. It's still there on Spotify, where you can type in Wake Up, and you have, I think it's like 18 or 23 motivational speeches that I liked. So of course, you might not like my speeches, so don't use that, or create your own. And it was just words in the morning where I would wake up, I would make my bed, I would go to the gym, and then I began the work process, reading the books, getting the business coaches, etc., what I needed to do. And we saw growth, and it was like, okay, this is nice. And then, like I said, 1920 happened. I was like, oh, I didn't plan for this. So it's something that we can't plan for. It's almost like we're going on the journey. We don't know what's around the corner. And I think that is off-putting to some people. But then again, to some people, that mystery drives them. What would you say is the most challenging part to being a business owner, or being someone who is hungry for something more than just their 9-to-5 job?
I think there's a lot of challenges along the way. Answer it the best way that I can, because I think a lot of it is the beginning, right? That is always challenging. But I think what I learned in my last business, so just to kind of parallel yours, we started a software company. A friend of mine, I'm in Canada, by the way. And I only mention that because I met this friend in something that we call Beavers here in Canada, which is the precursor to Cub Scouts. Because we're Canadian, we call it Beavers. That's when you're, I don't know, 5, 6 years old. My dad was our leader. And so I met this guy back then. We were never super close, but we were in the same circles for most of our lives. And then we reconnected professionally in our late 20s. And we started a business together in our 30s. And we grew. We actually just raised our first VC round. We grew to about 20 people before we raised money. Then I still remember the presentation to the company. The PowerPoint deck was about how we had just raised money. And then the last 3 slides were, and there's this virus, so we're going to go home and do, practice our disaster recovery stuff for a week. But, hopefully we'll be back after that. That was the very beginning of the pandemic. And then we raised more money. And we grew from 20 to 100 people in the first year and a half of the pandemic, which was great because what we were building was suited for them. But then it also, a lot of other things in the economy kind of went crazy and then the business struggled. The reason that I'm telling you some of that is there really are so many aspects that are difficult in being a business owner, being a entrepreneurial. And the good part is that you get to be creative. And I just want to make sure that I always say this, right? The creativity to me, the freedom to make choices, to explore things, to figure things out like your podcast and that all of those things are part of the joys of being entrepreneurial, but those can exist in a day job. I always want to make sure that people don't think that the only way to experience that is in, being a business owner. There's upside to that. But as someone who has been an entrepreneur and worked for other people, I brought the same skills to the jobs that I did have. And they actually helped me grow faster in those jobs because I continued to take risks to treat it like it was my own business. So I always encourage that. But what I found, and this is a very specific thing, but I like to make sure people understand this, is as a non-planner, this is something that can happen very easily, but I think it can happen to even the best of planners, is that if you aren't clear on why you want the business, I'm not saying you have to have every plan, know how it's going to work out, but know the life you ultimately want, you can end up succeeding and not being happy. And that is one of the most difficult things because people glamorize what it's going to be like to, take me as a tech founder, right? We raised $20 million from some of the best venture capitalists in the world. They're behind a third of the IPOs. We thought we were on that track to, be that next household name. We grew a team of 100 people. And I remember my partner and I, our fantasy, after we had raised money, we had this board of directors, we had the VCs, breathing down our necks. We had 100 people looking at us for direction, and we were still making it up as we went, right? Like you don't magically have all the answers. And our fantasy was, man, I wish we were still small. I wish it was still 5 or 10 of us again. And the conversation that still stands out in my mind was my partner had been on vacation with his family, and he met the founder, the CEO of a small design company. They were intentionally small. They were 7 people. They did profit sharing. They always had offers to buy them out or to invest in them. And they just wouldn't do it because he realized what I wish I had, which was the fun, the creativity, and the place that I like best is the small side of it. That's just who I am. I like that stage of it. But because we just got on this train that was leading us towards what is, the standard vision of success, bigger, more people, more money, more customers, we were growing and not loving it. And I'm not saying that I was upset, but I do think that the hardest part is maintaining why you're doing it, right? And if you can be clear on that, I'm doing this because I like the freedom, I like this intimate feel, I like to have my hands on the work that I do, then you may not like it if you end up on a track where you're going to have 1,000 employees and 4 head offices and you're just going to be traveling around giving speeches or doing spreadsheets. You've succeeded, but you're not doing the thing you love anymore. And so I think that's from entrepreneurial side, there's other, believe me, there's lots of difficult days and payrolls and other things to make. But I think one of the most important ones is having a few non-negotiables, the things that are driving you. And I go back to one of your early questions, right? As someone that goes after my plan A, it really, that time got away from us. But for the most part, the thing that drives me is a pursuit of the things that are just kind of stuck in my head, the ability to be creative. And I just love to make. And I try to hold that as my non-negotiable, which means that, I could get bigger, I could do it differently. I can do it in all these different ways. But I now realize that where I'm happiest is when it's the right size. Just, I like it when I can pay the bills. But and I like to build, towards whether it's legacy, and I got family, I got kids, and I'm married. There's certain things that I care about, but I can't trade that hands-on approach, because otherwise what's going to happen is I'm going to be unhappy, or what my partner and I were doing, which was we were still tinkering in the weeds, and our employees wanted us to be executives and they wanted us out of the way because that's what they want, right? And that's fair to them, but we couldn't strike that balance. And I know that's kind of an odd answer, but I think that is one of the hardest parts, is maintaining who you are, who you want to be, why you wanted to do that thing to begin with, and not losing it just because there are a lot of compromises you're going to have to make to pay the bills, to find success. But you got to try and hold on to a couple of things. Can't hold on to everything, but if you have a few non-negotiables, those are really important. Otherwise, as I said, you can be there and just be fantasizing about doing it all over again in a smaller scale. And it was an interesting learning that I had.
Yeah, I always say this to everyone, that it's like when they question, it's not question, but when they're finalizing their answer to me. They're like, I hope that answered your question, or is an odd answer. Here in Coaching in Session, there is no odd, there is no right or wrong. It is yours. Like whatever you give us, it's so powerful, because one of the things I do with Coaching in Session is I make sure that there's not much communication that happens before the episode, because all the juice, all the goodness is in that first bite. I don't know which is better, the first bite of ice cream or the second. Which one do you think?
I actually, it's the first, right? It is.
It has to be.
Yeah, like I use pancakes.
Uh-huh.
It was from a comedian a long time ago I listened to, but it's the same, where it's like the first bite of a pancake is so delicious, but by the end of it, I'm it's like I don't even want to see it anymore.
Exactly.
It's diminishing returns, but yeah, no, I'm the same. Not only do I like it for these conversations, but when I'm mentoring and coaching people, working with people. Even the content that I'm kind of obsessed with right now for myself, I am really obsessed with the raw, real take, right? I don't know if it's going to happen as much as I hope, but the barrier, I'm going to tie this to business, because this is kind of an obsession that I have right now. The barrier to so many things is being reduced because of AI. And I'm a tech guy. I don't mind AI, but what it is doing is removing this barrier. In the past, it was, I can't start a business, I'm not technical, especially in people that want to get into technical things, in content, in writing and making videos. There's so many people that are just like, well, I don't have a strong idea, so not, but hey, I got AI, it's going to do it for me now. And there's nothing wrong in using it to augment, to, as systems, but it is limiting this authentic, flawed discovery type of conversation and even content. I did something similar to you back in my early days, where I used to listen to streaming radio, but I used to listen to speeches and, even books on tape. There was a stream that was just mixed in. There was shuffled. It was weird. I'd hear the books out of sequence, but that's what I listened to when I worked, because it was inspiring to me just to hear the ideas and conversations. But I think that what I encourage people to do when they're out there making content or just trying to get comfortable being public is to not over-engineer it, right? There's the way to stand out now, the way to build real connections with people, like we are meeting for the first time for about 30 seconds before we spoke, is to not overproduce everything, right? Like it's this real conversation is I think a movement, and I think more and more there's going to be some swinging of the pendulum of from overproduced, everything flashy, everything. There's always a place for that, Hollywood and Netflix not going away, but when it comes to podcasts, conversations, content, written, video, spoken, I think that the more honest you can be, the more you can be that first lick of ice cream, the more you can just be the first take that is real and flawed and vulnerable. There's something special to that. And I think that the more that we do that, even as business owners, entrepreneurs, content creators, you create a different type of connection than if everything is polished from day one. And I'd say that, just to tie it to my kind of core advice for any aspiring entrepreneur out there, is you're never going to be right at the beginning, right? We've talked about how you got to figure it all out. So when you polish it and you present yourself as if you have it all figured out, but the finished product that people see is still flawed and learning, you've just created a gap between what you presented as and what's actually there. And if you instead go like, hey, I am figuring this out. You want to try the very first thing that I ever made? I've only spent a day on it. It's going to break. But I think there's some gem here. People are receptive. They see the vulnerability. They're willing to try. They're willing to watch or listen, and they want to see you evolve. But if you walk in the room and you're like, I'm the greatest next whatever, try it out. And it's made on a flip phone and the audio's broken and everything else. Well, they're like, well, you're just delusional is what you are. So there's this opportunity to just be real. And so I appreciate the way you run this too, right? Because I could edit these words, if you snapped a thing and said take two, I could cut out 30% of what I just said and make it really super tight. But this is the real me. This is the real conversation. I think that's valuable to a lot of people.
Yeah. And today we have lost this concept of real conversations where everything is short form, is quick, is easy. And I just like the long conversations more than the quick bits. And like, yeah, sure, we can give you 5 reasons why you're not successful and how to be successful. And we can get 1,000, 50,000 people, whatever, look at this and say, okay, I'm taking all these notes. And guess what happens to those notes? It's no action. So today is this idea of taking the first steps is hearing about 2 individuals that are on this podcast right now who have taken steps, who have maybe taken some missteps, have fallen over.
Continue to make missteps.
And we will continue to keep on falling down. But
absolutely,
the joy is that we keep on getting back up. So as we begin and wrap up, Art, I would love to get some final words, some final thoughts. I know you gave us some beautiful things at the end, but if you want to add anything to that, and then to tell people where they can find you, reach out, or even just to maybe email and have a conversation with you.
Sure. No, I think my just to kind of wrap up my core thoughts on life is that what I tell everybody, people that look up to me, people that I've employed that have wondered how I did it. I've been an entrepreneur for, close to 20 years at this point. The answer I always give to everybody, and, I think, unfortunately, they see it if they spend enough time with me, is that I'm not special. I have some unique skills, as we all do. I'm a talker. I'm delusionally confident at times, but I'm also, I go through all the fears and doubts and everything else. There is nothing inherently special about somebody that takes their first steps, that is willing to try. The difference is that they did it, that they figured things out as they went, that they learned from their own mistakes, and that they just kept going and they kept improving. Like that's my advice to anybody. There is no manual. There's no moment where you're going to have enough information or be ready to do any of the things that you think you're going to do. And none of the people that are doing it right now, or very few of them, were born that way, studied to become that thing directly. They just tried. And over time, without even fully realizing it, you acquire skills, you figure out the frameworks that work for you. And the things that you can't do, the limitations you think you have, can be part of your system, right? If we all had the exact same, everything would be the same. But the shortcomings that I have are the things that make me special in my own way, right? They force me to do it my way because I can never compete the way that other people do things. And so I always encourage people to just be willing to do that, to accept that they don't have to look like the person before them. They can learn from their steps, but to be themselves. And then in terms of where you can find me, the number one place where I'm at right now, and I'm going to recommend this to you as well, Michael, which because you like the long form. Right now, my biggest obsession and where I've been putting my time just for the last month or two has been on my YouTube channel. So you can find me at the Art Harrison. And what I've been doing are long form stories and conversations. I think you nailed my thesis, which is not proven to be successful yet. And I'm okay with that, which is I know I could get more views if I titled everything the 5 ways to the 6 steps to becoming whatever. And I'm actively refusing to do that. And instead, I'm sharing the real stories of my past, the fears and doubts and struggles of my present, and the lessons that I've learned along the way in kind of it's long form, but still talking 5 to 6 minutes per story. But they are usually a single take of this guy that just can't stop talking. That is the number one place to find me. You can also find the program at FSTEPinitiative.com, and you can email me at anybody. I'm always available, art@FSTEPinitiative.com. But just, I love conversations. I will hop on with anybody. The only struggle that you'll have, and I think you did a great job, by the way, I'm going to give you the compliment here, which is that I am a lot. I have this energy from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, but even sometimes into my sleep. And sometimes people struggle to get a word in around me, but you've held your own, which I greatly appreciate, and kept this flowing really nicely. But yeah, I'm always happy to jump on calls with people if they can reach me there. But I'm literally in an exploratory part of my life right now where I sold the business, and I have my plan A, which is that I have enough stories and experience to share, and I am exploring and fumbling my way through building the next chapter. That's the freedom that I was granted from having a business, is that I was given more flexibility to spend time to figure it out than ever before. But it still is a struggle. I'm trying to document it as I go so that other people know that even when you come, I did it with 100 in the bank account. I'm doing it with a little bit more this time, and it is still as blind and difficult as it was the first time.
Yeah, I have your YouTube channel on my screen right now. I'm definitely going to look at what you have been doing. I'm also going to subscribe, and I encourage everyone who's listening to do the same. His links are going to be right down below, and to continue the conversation in the comments, and maybe even more personal email or social media or something along those lines. Because when we are venturing on a journey in our life, sometimes we can have a good plan, we can prepare, we can pack our hiking gear and pack to the brink, thinking that we're equipped for everything. And then the moment you get to the campsite or your destination, you realize that you forgot your canteen, you forgot something, right? And that's the journey of life, where maybe things won't be perfect, but on the way there, you figure out what worked, what didn't work, and how to prepare yourself to be so much better the next go around. Because like I said, a kid who's learning how to walk, they're going to stand. They might think about taking that first step and they fall on their butt. And most of the time they smile because of the joy of what is possible. So I want you to smile at the joy of what is possible in your life, and to check out the links, as I said, down below. Art, thank you so much for coming on, spending some time, and of course, talking about your work, talking about your journey and what's coming next in your life.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.